Welcome back, everyone. This is the second part of the second episode of Nationalist Academy. If you want to listen to our book reviews, then please tune in to the first part. I am joined with my co-hosts Thomas and Uber, and we were before some technical problems caused us to make this a two-part episode. I was bringing up a opinion I have that I think is one of the most controversial or at least liked opinions I have, and it's a term I just kind of not term, but a phrase that I use that in anarchistic collective politics, the only morality is might makes right. And in this justification, it's going to be very, very unpopular with ethno nationalists, but it's the point that basically, to start out with a little kind of analogy, you you can't really justify or condemn morally Alexander the Great for invading Phoenicia. It's not a matter that you can say that, oh, Alexander the Great and when we say Alexander the Great we mean the Greek Empire was morally terrible. They're terrible people because they conquered land. I actually uploaded a great video kind of debunking this argument from a movie, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, where basically the American general like debunks this thing because the Indians are like, you're invading our land and you're using force to take it. It's not right. And he says, and he basically says, you invaded this land yourself. You came in and you swarmed on the Shawnee, the Chippewa. You set upon your fellow brothers and slaughtered them and took the land for yourselves, and we've come here for no less noble a reason. It's this basic idea that in anarchism and collectivism, in basically the international scene, whoever controls the land, whoever has the might to justify the control, that's the only justification they need. You can't say this land belongs to this people with any other justification with they have the might to own the land. It's completely different with individuals and everything like that, and also within a government system because it gets into kind of it gets into kind of liberal ideas of social contract and everything like that, and everyone playing along by the same rules. But in absolute, anarchy, there are no property rights. There are no anything like that. There are no inherent rights of countries. There's only might. So the reason Japan is the rightful owner of Japan is because they had the force to come in, slaughter the natives living on the islands, and take it for themselves. And I hold this opinion for funnily enough, for Israel as well. Whether Palestine overtakes all the Jews and expels them from Israel and lay claim to land, they're justified in having it as long as they have the might to keep anyone else from conquering it. And the same way with Israel. If they come in and just wipe out the Palestinians and say this is our land and no one else has the might to usurp them, then they justly have the land. I know it's very kind of out there and very kind of hard to swallow. But what do you all think of that opinion?
Well, I mean, it depends on the way we want to look at history. It depends on the lens, the perception by which we would like to analyze history. But yeah, pretty much when you're walking
It's
into a
yeah.
situation that there is no governing laws, you're dealing with these native tribes that really don't have any conception of any of the more complicated nuances of human civilization, then you're not committing some kind of moral sin by taking their land from them. It's not their land. They don't have that concept. Like, I would agree with you, basically, is what I'm saying.
And funnily enough, even though that many on the alt-right hate her and I don't particularly like her, but Ayn Rand also justified that. She added a further justification that it was good that the white people, the Americans, took lands from the natives because they weren't doing anything productive with it. But I'm going even one step further, that even if you don't do anything productive for it, as long as you maintain the might to control that land, then the Mongols have the right to Mongolia only as long as they, have the might to keep out other non-Mongolians from controlling it. Because, and my justification for this is, when looking through history, no one with any kind of common sense would fault say they wouldn't they could fault it in terms of a policy sense, saying it wasn't feasible to do or it's not good in the long term for the functionality of the government for, say, Rome to invade Britain or anything like that. But they wouldn't go far as to say Rome Rome itself is collectively morally responsible for invading Britain, and the rightful heirs of the land were the Celtics, and they were just in burning the city. No, it's both of them were justified. Both the Romans for invading the Celtic people in the British Isles, and for the Celtic people likewise in turn to rebel and reconquer their land and burn London to the ground. That's my basic justification for it. That looking through all the different wars and conquests in history, you can fault them policy-wise and functionally-wise, but you can't judge them morally-wise, because I don't think that, as I put it, summoning up, in anarchistic collective politics, there is no moral. There is no moral besides might makes right.
Right. Well, yeah,
But,
and just
Yeah,
based on the way that history unfolds, you can't really deduce any kind of like moral pattern from it other than that.
right. I mean, yes. I was gonna say to a certain extent, like no civilization or nation or empire fell, which wasn't like morally degenerate towards the end, anyways. Like might is almost a
required.
coefficient of the moral health of the state, almost.
And that's somewhat true to an extent. I would say there are some exceptions to this from my understanding that the that idea of might in terms of a coefficient with moral health, it's relative to the nation itself, the might of the nation versus the might being exerted by everyone within that nation. But at the same time, a counterexample to that I would put forth would be Japan during the Shogun era, where their armies were absolutely abysmal compared to the West, yet at the same time I would say they were a very, very traditionalist and morally they were doing morally all right before they fell in lieu of modernizing their military and everything like that. And you could consider that the fall of an empire, kind of the samurai shogunate of Japan.
Right.
But getting
Well,
back to this collective point, what I think that people really won't like about it is it also refutes the claim that many will have, and I'm probably going to get a hell of a lot of flack for this, but it also refutes the claim that when people say Europe is the homeland, that the European people deserve to have European countries. Here's the thing.
Not if
Yes,
they don't defend them.
yes,
Then they don't
that's
deserve
exactly the point. It's like if Greece or Germany or anyone like that, if they don't utilize their might to defend their countries, then the people who do are. So
Right.
if
Everybody,
if
I
the
don't know if this
Islamist
is
jihadis
unpopular as you're suggesting, Cole, because after the French election, when Le Pen lost and Macron won, I saw multiple people on I mean, not even multiple, it was probably at least fucking 10 people, if not more, on the timeline suggesting that, like, well, if the French people can't even be bothered to fucking vote in their own interests, much less defend their homeland, exert might, anything on that level. If they can't even be bothered to enact policy to defend their own soil, then they don't even really fucking deserve it. That, like,
yeah, exactly,
the
and
next,
that's
the next women that are raped and beheaded by some fucking crazed jihadi on their soil. I mean, as tragic
it's
as
on
it
them,
is,
and that's
as
where
much as
I get
that
the
woman didn't necessarily. I mean, it would be even fucking better if she voted for Macron, but, like, even if she didn't, even if she voted for Le Pen, like, she didn't choose it, whatever. Like, they as a society didn't collectively decide, like, hey, we need to stop this shit, so they deserve whatever the fuck is coming to them. Like,
Yeah,
everyone was saying that on that day. So I don't know
and
if you're
and
as
that's why I
alone as
reject
you
the policy
suggest.
that some people say. Yes, it's a good kind of romantic idea. This idea of America intervening, and we're American white nationalists, and we need to go defend the homeland, and we'll retake European countries from their exploiters and the invaders and everything like that. But it's like no, if they're not exerting the might to defend their own countries, then they're not justified in having the countries and such like this. It's kind of a double-edged sword, and although you say it's not that unpopular opinion, I think it is definitely a very
I
unpopular
th-
opinion to say that the European people don't deserve their own
I
countries
think
if they don't personally go and defend them.
I think people. Okay, so I I think people counter signal against it because I think people feel that it could be used as a weapon against seedling like nationalist movements, so to speak. The people feel that I don't know, let's say like an insurgent nationalist movement in France, for instance,
Hmm.
could be theoretically shut down by um, you know, merchants or something of that nature who are arguing that, like, well, the rest of your countrymen don't feel that you should defend your homeland, so you don't deserve it. And, like, I mean, I think you're right. I just think that maybe people within the alt-right think that that's a, almost kind of like, don't give away your playbook to the enemy sort of deal,
Hmm. And I'll
you
agree,
know?
it's definitely a double-edged sword. While it debunks the claim of indigenous people, the indigenous people's land argument, it also debunks your justification for the land. Besides the might makes right things, and we haven't
Right.
been
Well, I mean,
utilizing our might.
I I think everyone sort of I don't know.
Might
I
unconsciously
agree with
understand it.
you, right? Even unconsciously, I was gonna say I don't want to disagree with you too much, but like in the past I've kind of signaled like when it's a very useful argument in some cases actually, because when some people in the left or whatever talk about reparations or something like oy vey, white colonialism, like all that shit, right?
Hmm.
I like to bring up the Mongolian Empire, right? I
Hmm.
mean, reparations for Mongolia. If you apply the same standard to everyone, then fucking everyone owes everyone reparations. And some
Hmm.
people owe reparations to nations and states and ethnicities that don't even fucking exist anymore. So then what are we supposed to do with that? What reparations can they pay? Do we just exterminate them in turn so that
And it
two
brings away the
wrongs make a
takeaway
right?
that it's
It's just
better. And actually, that's kind of a solid policy thing. It's absolutely horrible to say, but if you're conquering a nation, it's better to just wipe out the indigenous
right,
population
because
rather
then
than
there's no
slave
one
them.
for you to have to
Because
pay
then,
reparations to
yeah,
after the
because
liberals
they
take
can.
over.
Because I guess who was it? It's probably some philosopher that said that, or military tactician that said it, that it's better to genocide your enemy in its entirely, lest their sons come
Um,
back and
I think
and avenge
I
him.
think you're channeling Machiavelli right now, to a greater extent with your argument. I think he was the one who said that. Where I mean, either of you or listeners could correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free. But I
Hmm.
think he was the one who said, like, if you're going to attack someone, don't just wound them. Make sure you fucking kill them. Because if
Hmm.
you wound them, then they could seek revenge. But if you kill them, then they can't fucking come back later and try to avenge themselves upon you. I'm pretty sure it's either
Fucking ghost
Machiavelli or
ethnic,
Sun Tzu.
fucking ghost ethnic revenge, man.
Yeah, I mean, Indian burial grounds, man.
I,
Yeah, oh no.
and that's interesting. Do you think that's actually some kind of, not even like a conscious thing, but some kind of subconscious thing? We attribute like extra mysticism to indigenous populations, and we kind of have some kind of white
It's
collective guilt to this
it's
idea of
it
the
is.
Indian tribesmen are angry that we took their land, and they're
It
rightly coming back
well,
to avenge it.
right. Not even just that, but I would say that. Well, first I'll address that, and then yes, I believe that for partially, I agree with your take on the morals of it and all, but to a certain extent, partially rightfully and partially idiotically, people do sort of have this sense of like, oh, Indians, my Indians, their land and shit,
Hmm.
you know, for better or for worse. And I think the flip side of that coin is, to a certain extent, people fetishize Native Americans and their mysticism and their culture and their supposed enlightenment, the myth of the noble savage and so forth.
And it is the
Like,
myth of the
I,
noble savage,
I
and it's a
really
lot worse
don't
in
think
Canada
they.
than America.
Oh
I
yeah.
really don't think they were, to be honest. I mean, I'm sure you guys don't think they were some kind of like, oh, enlightened, gentle, just like
No, they weren't
perfect
at all.
utopian people before white showed
And here's
up.
the
Like,
thing,
that's
genetically,
fucking
they're closer to
bullshit.
Asians. And if you know anything about Asian history, Asian culture and everything like that, they are absolutely brutal. If there's a warring
Well,
faction, then the opposite warring faction that loses, they're absolutely lucky if they're able to run away with like 10% of their population still alive.
right,
They
and
don't
not
take
even
slaves. They
that.
come in and slaughter everything.
Right, and not even just that, but if you think of Native Americans as an extension of Asians, like, how far to fucking fall and degenerate? Like, if even, China or Japan has its problems, but they're a fucking functional civilization with the conception of, like, land and currency. So you came over the Bering Strait, like, 50,000 years ago, and when, Japan had Bushido and feudalism and all that. You had fucking sharpened sticks and like hide tents. Like
And the,
how
and yeah, the
how the fuck
comparison
could
is
you
they're not even
not?
that much better than the Aboriginals. And the very height of their and this is talking about before like Western intervention, the very height of their civilization were kind of like bloodthirsty like cannibals of the Aztec Empire and things like that, of doing
Right.
ritual human sacrifice, of carving out
Sure.
hearts
I
and
mean, if
eating
you
them
even
and
if you want to
stuff.
look at like less brutal or something, like the Incas or something. I mean, their civilization it wasn't as brutal as the Aztecs, but they're I mean they practiced mummification in like fucking I don't know fucking like 1500 AD.
I believe they also did live mummification of pets along with their owners, right?
I mean, yeah, they didn't. I don't think they even had the wheel.
Oh, and I recommend this on numerous times, but I highly recommend the channel ADV China, and I'm gonna bring up a why this is relevant in a second. But basically, it's these two white guys, one originally from America, one originally from South Africa, and they've been living as English teachers in China, and I love it because they've been living there for like a decade or decade and a half, and so they absolutely know Chinese culture and how China really works. And it's interesting just seeing absolutely it's not a matter of worse or better. It's a matter of just how different it is. And getting back to how it's related, because the Native Americans are related to the Asians, they have a similar conception of it's kind of romanticized here in America that they respect animals and everything like that, but no, that was a kind of isolated thing. In China, the word for animal, it's if you directly translate it, it's translated as moving thing. It's just some object, some moving thing on the ground,
It's
and
almost
it's
like
a
an
problem.
inanimate object that moves.
Exactly,
Like,
and that's where it comes from. And there's a big problem with animal cruelty in China. Now, it's going down, but they do things like, the stereotype, and it's actually true that, they eat dogs. In order to do a superstition that they believe, the more painfully you kill the dog while preparing it, then the more delicious its meat is going to be when eating it. And they lack empathy for animals. This is changing in modern years, but one of the most recent things is these accessories that they have, where they have like a little turtle or a little fish in a necklace, and it's contained permanently. It's permanently sealed, so within about a week or so it dies and you buy a new one. But it's a market that just kind of built off this animal cruelty, and this ties back to the Native Americans because we can see that within these tribes of, yes, they can have honor for animals and everything like that, and they can use every part, but they have absolutely no qualms in terms of butchery and brutality of the animals, of causing them pain. It's they honor their ancestors, and they honor animals by supposedly using every part and everything's like that. But they have no qualms about either strangling an animal to death, beating it to death, or anything. They don't have this
Chase it off
concept
a
of
cliff.
painless. Yeah, they don't have a concept of giving it a humane, painless death, and funnily enough,
Why
that's
doesn't
also
PETA fucking protest that shit?
and funnily enough, that's also in the Jewish killings of fuck, what's it?
Right, the
Being
kosher
kosher
slaughtering.
slaughter of cows, and that
Halal
was actually
too.
one of the propaganda videos that the Germans used, and they actually put a disclaimer warning, just like, if you're young, don't look at this little Hitler youth, and it's absolutely like
Little
revolting.
Hitler.
It's absolutely like revolting, just showing them how they kill this like
Don't
cow.
they take the cow and they hang it upside down, and then they
Hang it by
slit
its back
throat,
legs, and they slit it by its
have
throat.
it
Yeah.
bleed to death from its throat.
Yep.
That's not even from my conception as a internet Nazi. That's just what I knew before what kosher entails. Yes, that's red pill me if I'm wrong. That's what it is, right?
Yes.
Yep, that's completely right. They can't have blood in their meat, so they
Holy
completely
fucking
bleed
shit.
the cow till it dies.
From its neck.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It can't even suffocate on its own blood because the blood can't be pumped up into its lungs.
Uh-huh.
It just fucking bleeds to death from its neck.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually a huge point of contention between people in India, because the Indians, misconception, they're all vegetarians, they do eat meat, but they believe in severing the head completely at one time so the animal dies immediately, whereas the people that eat halal do this bleeding out thing, and the Indians think that's horrific, and that's a big point of contention actually between those two religions.
hmm
I forget what the Indian name for it is. It's like Jakar or something, where you chop the head off right away. Does sound a little more humane to me, just saying.
And you can just see like you can contrast it with what we do in Western European things. I mean, we have so many groups advocating animal rights and everything like that, and they don't really have a basis for that. But I mean, just our human, or not even human, our Caucasian empathy,
Western empathy.
like we try to do things like we try to instantly kill the animal, or we try to like put it to sleep by knocking it unconscious first, and we do all these different things. I mean, yes, it's true, and you can come up with the thing of just, if a farmer wants to kill his cow, he'll just go out and shoot it in the head or something like that. But in industrialized thing, I mean, we have so many things of just, a chicken dying just instantly ground up by a cutter, and there's absolutely nothing left of it anymore, rather than bleeding it out and doing all these terrible things and having them as accessories and,
Yeah.
as the Chinese would put it, moving things. It's I don't even really know where I'm going with this, but I guess back to the basic point was the Native Americans are overly glorified. They're kind of looked to
Right, they're fetishized.
yeah, they're looked to as like, oh, a spiritual, not even ancestor, just like an oh-so-wise people that we are terrible for
They lived
exterminating.
in harmony with the earth and
Oh,
all its
fuck
creatures
off.
and each other. It was just a utopia before white men showed up. It's like, yeah, nobody ever mentions the fucking Aztecs when they're talking about that made up shit.
And even the northern Indian tribes, as I mentioned in the videos called indigenous people argument blown the fuck out, BTFO. It's basically the general argues that he basically says, "Sir, your people did not sprout from the plains like the spring glass, nor did they coalesce out of the ether. Your tribe slaughtered the ones before you, and they slaughtered the ones before them. And the idea that you were peaceable until the white man came and sold you guns is the most fanciful idea in your religion."
Yeah.
And I absolutely love that, and I find it as a good justification for it, that war is the natural state of international relations. It's this idea of it's not even peaceful coexistence. It's almost like just peaceful dominance that the world hegemonic power of the United States is kind of not letting people sort out their land disputes and their beefs with each other by saying these are your borders. Any change of these will be met with instant international aggression, as we saw with Russia. And I mean,
Right.
you both can say whether you agree or not, but I mean, I think that Crimea does have a legitimate and justified reason for being a part of Russia rather than Ukraine.
I
Right? Do you
agree.
agree?
I actually totally agree with that.
Didn't they? I mean, okay, so pardon me if I'm being utterly fucking retarded. Like, you can both
I can explain
correct me
I can
immediately.
explain the
All right.
general situation.
This
So
Sure, but this is just my
okay.
uh, um observation. Didn't the fucking Crimean people vote to join? Didn't they democratically decide they wanted to be part of Russia?
Yeah, so here's the situation. Here's the events that happen. Basically, the CIA instigates a coup in Ukraine that ousts the pro-Russian type government and institutes a pro-NATO, pro-European,
Right.
pro-US government, and instigates and is trying to push forward the policy of getting Ukraine to join NATO to, block Russian aggression and everything like that because it's a relic of the Cold War. And of course, Russia doesn't want that because it'll mean more military bases that are, generally oppositional to Russia along their border. So it's kind of a dual purpose. There is a legitimate reason because within the Crimean area, it's all ethnic Russian, not ethnic Ukraine. And these people, they of course don't like the U.S. coup because it's anti-Russian and stuff like that. And there's basically a Ukrainian civil war going on with this coup government fighting the Ukrainian resistance that's very pro-Russia and everything like that. So on that side, yes, totally. The ethnic Russians voted. They had a referendum to say, do we want to leave Ukraine? They voted overwhelmingly yes. I can't even remember what it was. I think it was like 97% voted to leave Ukraine, and then a few days later, the government extended not an offer but a request to join Russia, and Russia, of course, eagerly accepted. Now, there is another side. There is a militaristic side. Ukraine is justified in owning that land, as we said before, because might makes right. As long as the Ukrainian government, whether it was elected by the people or not, as long as they have the might to rule over that particular land, they're justified, and the same with Russia. But at the same time, some military reasoning behind it is Crimea borders the Black Sea and has a very, very, very important port that basically, if whoever controls it, basically controls that whole entire area of water in the Black Sea, moving down into is it the Black Sea or is it or is it the Caspian
It's the
Sea?
Black Sea. That's the
It's not the
Black Sea.
Caspian Sea.
No.
Yes.
All right, so the Black Sea, and basically that whoever controls that port has naval supremacy of the Black Sea. And yes, from a very militaristic and might makes right standpoint, the U.S. does have a very good reason for saying Crimea shouldn't belong to the Russians for this military standpoint. But in the terms of the standpoint of an ethnic nationalist standpoint, that the people who are your ethnicity belong in your nation, then yes, their land that they own, which is Crimea, does have a very good justification for being moved to and owned by Russia. So those were the basic breakdown of events. So is that basically what you thought had happened?
Yeah, that's pretty much the conception that I had. I was just saying more that, like, you couldn't defend it from an ethnic point of view, rather the idea that Crimea didn't belong to Russia
Mm-hmm.
couldn't be defended from an ethnic point of view. It couldn't be defended from a more Machiavellian might makes right point of view. It couldn't be defended from a democratic point of view. Just like there was no real defense other than sort of like it fits into the U.S.'s past and or current interests, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
But
It supports
yeah,
the
that
it
pretty much
supports
is
the
my
hegemony
conception.
of U.S. U.S.
Right,
dominance.
the NATO sort of
Mm-hmm.
NATO UN world power structure, more or less. But woo.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the Ukraine and Crimea specifically was originally cut off of Russia and put into Ukraine during the Soviet Union. That area used to be the Crimean Khanate. It was, Muslim at one time. The Russians controlled it for hundreds of years there afterwards, converting it to Christianity. Like, clearly this is part of Russia. A lot of the Ukraine, honestly, is clearly part of Russia. I'm sorry
Russia,
if we have
get on it. You have Chechnya. Get on it.
Yeah. Like, just, take it back. It used to be part of the Russian Empire, and then you got the Soviet mess. So, yeah, I for one, am totally fine with Russia taking those chunks of Russia that belong to it back. I get why NATO doesn't like that, and I get why NATO tried to make the Ukraine part of it, but guess what, NATO? When you mess with Russia like that, things are going to start happening in those countries. And if you try to encircle Russia completely, you're going to have backed the bear into a corner. What do you think it's going to do?
Either of you could remind me, when was the last time someone fucked with Russia and it went well for them? Seriously.
The Japanese-Russian War.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the Crimean War went okay for the British.
Yeah. Okay.
Not that terrible. But yeah, not a great track record of opposing Russia for the world. So, I mean...
Yeah, here's the
thought.
They
tend to have a lot of might.
And they also tend to have, geography on their side.
Yeah, I know. They don't invade Russia in the winter. I don't know how many people have to fucking...
It's the true reason
how many
behind
great
global
men?
Warming. Somebody planned this a long time ago. They just said, if we warm up the world, you can't invade Russia in the winter if there's no more winter. Thinking blackguy.jpg. Fucking hell. And here's the thing with Russia. Yes, I can admit that it's corrupt, that it's run by oligarchs and Putin, everything like that, and he's not even an ethno-nationalist. However, he's kind of an in-between between Trump's civic nationalism and ethno-nationalism. He of course is Russian nationalist, but it's, like I said, I can't even really describe it. It's in between. It's not entirely civic nationalist that we are going to import a bunch of people on H-1B visas and get the most high-skilled people from everywhere across the world into our country, but at the same time, it's not, hey you Jews, get out of the country.
Right. Hey you Jews.
When was the last time someone actually, I don't know.
What, said, hey you Jews, get out of the country?
Yeah, hey you Jews, get out of the fucking country, like maybe Franco?
No, it would be much sooner than that. I think there's
Well, Franco was president of Spain until like 74, lad. That's when he died.
Was that the most recent?
I think there's some Asian countries that specifically say Jews get out.
Holy shit, where do I need to move to? Red pill me on this.
I don't remember, but it's kind of funny. Like, Asians are very ethnocentric, and it's absolutely great.
Well, right.
I have a video of
Asians are base as fuck.
I have a video of a Japanese girl protesting outside a Japanese airport, saying we should genocide all the Koreans. and no, it's not like the guy is standing there saying you deserve rape. She's out there saying literally, we need to genocide the filthy, evil Koreans.
I don't know if I saw that part, but a friend told me about this Japanese nationalist girl who their movement, they have like fucking imperial Japanese flags and shit, and they're saying like, this isn't the Korean peninsula, don't let our streets reek of kimchi. Like, it's fucking awesome.
And speaking of which, if you want to learn about Korea specifically, I would recommend it's not a documentary, it's actually a lecture. It's called The Cleanest Race, and it's absolutely fascinating because it basically dispels this idea that North Korea is actually communist. It's specifically about the North Korean people, and it's absolutely a fascinating lecture. He talks about how these myths came about, that most people who are in North Korean think tanks, not of North Korea, but about North Korea, that they actually don't speak Korean, and it's actually kind of a funny thing, and it's very interesting the way he frames it. They have a very ethno-nash, it's not nationalist, but a very ethnocentric point of view that when they censor the outside world and everything like that, when they establish authoritarian government, it's not so much they want to oppress their people, it's with the people's complete understanding that they want to, that they are, as they put it, the cleanest race. And it's not so much that that they're out there to purify the world, but if they let in all these foreign influence, that they're going to dirty and sully their own race and everything like that. And funnily enough, it's actually close to a matriarchy, not a patriarchy, a matriarchy. That Kim Jong Un is yes, he's called the great parent, but he was also picked for being representative of like motherly tendencies, and he analyzes the politics of Korea since, like, they separated from China and everything like that, and also them separating from Japan. But basically, with Korea, they kind of look at what China does and say we can do that better. So when the communist government took hold in China, they had their own not revolutionary, but many philosophers saying, "Oh, well, we have our own brand of correct China for the best people," and that's where the meaning comes from. Best North Korea is best Korea. They literally think that they're a better race than the South Koreans. I highly recommend that documentary. It's called the Cleanest Race. But going on, Asian not culture, Asian history is absolutely fascinating when understanding ethnic relations between them. And many
Right.
people who, espouse multiculturalism and, progressivism, they just don't understand that there's actual, ethnic divides between the various Asians, as it was put once, and it was in some
Who
YouTube
doesn't
video, and all the
understand
Asians
that?
all the Asians hate each other for some reason. No, they're very
No,
good
yeah,
reasons
I
for
don't. I was gonna say I don't. Somebody doesn't understand that because all the Asian countries still fucking hate each other over shit that happened like hundreds of years
it.
ago.
Yep,
Right.
China's still
Like,
ranting about the invasion of
'Cause
Japan.
Japan, Korea is still fucking like bitching about the colonialism of Japan over Korea when it happened like 50 years ago. That would be like, I don't know, it would be like the French and Polish still being mad at the Germans. But they are. They are still fucking pissed about it for some reason or another.
Mhm.
It's kind of it's kind of awing because there was even this is getting into I'm exposing my weeb culture just a little
Mhm.
bit. But if either of you are familiar with Attack on Titan, one of the more popular
I know about
animes
it, but
out
I
there,
haven't watched it.
one of the generals in there, it came out that he bore a striking resemblance to a Japanese general who served during the like Japanese-Korean War, and like there was fucking hell raised because he kind of looked like that dude. Like Korean fans were like infuriated that he would dare to use one of their country's like historical figures who had taken part in this international conflict. And I was like, dude, that was like 150 fucking years ago. What's wrong with you? But they were still fucking pissed about it. So
Yeah, well, I can't really fault them for that. I mean, I have the same kind of feelings with the Confederacy. I just the and I
Yeah,
bring this
Southerners are like that too.
yeah, and I bring this up that it was almost like it's a very hyperbolic, but it was almost like a 9/11 General Sherman's March to the Sea. I mean, in Georgia history, that's one of like the big tragedies. That's something that pretty much all Georgian people, if they have sympathies for the Confederacy, that's one of the things they all agree on. General Sherman's March to the Sea. General Sherman absolutely hated the Confederacy and hated Southerners. So what he did is he took his army, marched down through the South, and he basically tore up the rail lines and did General Sherman's neckties and tied them around trees and burnt. And that's a reason we don't have many buildings from before the end of the Civil War down here in the South, because he absolutely, as it was put, he burnt Atlanta to the ground. All of our old buildings, all of our, grandiose structures, whether they be churches or anything like that, were absolutely burnt to the ground. And to help people understand this, when he destroyed the railway system, and our train stations, Atlanta has always been a hub of transportation for both goods and everything like that. That's basically our backbone. So the equivalent of destroying our train stations would be like if today some terrorist organization came and just blew up the Atlanta airport. It would be just something so absolutely horrific and just an absolute attack on just our identity as a people. So I can understand these, I can understand when people have gripes about, decades and even centuries old wars and things like that. As it gets older, you can have kind of a meme type, and I hate that how the plural for meme is the meme word meme, but a meme type, it's a a meme type sentiment, so we can say things like, "Ah, fuck you, British redcoats. We kicked you out of our country, and we could do it again." Yeah, you can have those kind of things for old wars, but I mean, for more recent ones, they become less memey, like the French being invaded by Germans, and they do, I mean, we have a very biased perspective, and we could say that the French were freed from their degeneracy and installed a French nationalist government. But in actuality, yes, it was an invasion of their territory and a puppet state, and that is a legitimate grievance for French to have against German people.
Right. Yeah, make Alais part of Germany again. Give back Danzig, you fucking Poles.
Speaking
Too
of
bad
that,
Germany's lost its balls.
Tommy's German side is coming out.
Yeah, oof. Don't get me started. Don't get me started on East Prussia. That's a whole thing I could go into that I'm just not. It's very, very.
You just don't have time.
Exactly.
well, I think we're winding down the philosophical discussion, and we can keep talking after. But I thank everyone who listening for bearing with us having to break this up into two parts due to technical difficulties. We are going to be resuming next week. I still haven't chosen my book. Have either of you chosen or thought about your books that you're going to do next week?
Yeah, I'm about halfway through mine.
What book is it?
I'm thinking of doing.
I'm going to do
Alright,
a
Tom.
new translation of Crime and Punishment that I just got my hands on.
All
It's a
right,
good
cool.
one. Dostoevsky.
And what about you?
Oh,
Art?
yeah.
I'm thinking of doing The Doctrine of Fascism by Benito Mussolini.
Ooh.
And if she turns up, then my wife is thinking of doing maybe a or a couple chapters of People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, which is basically your stereotypical shit lib history textbook for the United States.
And when I heard of it, isn't I thought it was a communist historical document.
He
I thought it was like a communist.
He describes himself as a socialist.
I know. I thought it was the communist lens of history being history is a matter of materialist class warfare. Is that?
I read about the second half of it. I'll briefly say, it seems like Zinn, he recognizes that something is amiss in much of American history, and he places the blame squarely upon the feet of the evil rich people. And I mean, as we all know, that's about half true. But
And yeah, wait.
you
Did you all see? Have you all seen that funny clip of Noam Chomsky completely saying the most retarded thing ever?
What, that the Republicans are the most dangerous group to ever exist in
Yes.
the history of mankind?
Yes,
Like,
it's
are you fucking
Yeah, I know,
kidding
it's
me?
so
Worse than
ridiculous.
The Bolshevics? Are you
and
fucking
his reasoning
high right now?
and his reasoning is climate change.
right.
They're not threatening the fundamental existence of humanity. Fucking what? Fucking what, you cunt?
Yeah, oof.
I don't. We'll.
That's a whole other Spurg topic we could go into.
That's like a whole podcast, but all right.
Yep, and
so
thank you all
with
for
that-
listening, and we will see you all next week. Again, if you want to listen to the audiobook version of The Mysterious Stranger, I'm going to be uploading on my channel Colcoal, COLCOAL. And thank you all for listening.